Welcome to the Building Pathways to Healthy Minds podcast, where we share real world strategies to nurture children as they grow. I'm your host, Priscilla, and today we are diving into the subject of how to cultivate resilience in our children. This topic has often confused me. I understand what resilience is, and I know it when I see it, but how do I cultivate this in myself or my children? So today I am so excited to talk to Gretchen Lash, who is a wonderful educator, friend, colleague at ChildBuilders, and who we were talking a few weeks ago about this very topic. And she had some great thoughts. So I said, let's do a podcast on this. So today Gretchen is back and joining me to talk all things resilience. So let's get started. Hi, Gretchen.
Hi.
Tell us again, and for those who didn't get to listen to the first podcast, how long have you worked with kids in the past and child builders? And tell us a bit about your own kids. So let's start there. Let's start with our background and our stories and take it from there.
All right. Sounds great. Thanks, Priscilla. My name is Gretchen Lash, and I am the Director of Program Services at ChildBuilders. So I started working with kids right after high school. I was working in schools before I got my degree in college. I was working in special ed as a sort of an assistant with kids all over the spectrum and with all kinds of needs, and got my eyes opened up pretty wide with that experience. Then I went back and got my degree in elementary education, was a teacher for a while. And what I discovered in teaching is that I didn't really care so much about whether they learned math, but I did care about whether they were coming to school happy and connected and, just sort of happy with the world. But if you can hardly sit in your seat, and if you're worried about what's going to happen to you when you get home, and if you're distracted by, the fight that happened either in your neighborhood or with your parents or any kind of number of things, and that's distracting you from doing this ridiculous math assignment where we're counting pennies or dividing something that doesn't even make sense in real life, like I felt like, yeah, what's the point? The priorities were off for me. And that did lead me to social work, where I got my MSW when I got here.
Was that University of Houston?
Obviously. Yeah. And that led me to ChildBuilders. And at ChildBuilders, I discovered a place where they were writing curriculum that was being taught in schools to help kids develop that solid foundation, that resilience, and that positive mental health that they could take on the world. And I thought, well, there you go. That's what I've been looking for.
Yeah. And that was like when I first started, you were one of the first people to really bring the term like social and emotional learning to me. Having an educational background, I had heard of that, but I didn't really understand. Again, it's kind of like what I said about resilience, right? They're these bigger concepts, but how do we get them in the classroom? And so that was a really eye-opening moment when I said, gosh, if I had had that as a teacher, if I had known how to get more to the heart of my students, because often I didn't know how. And I guess maybe my personality was like, well, I don't really know how to do this. I'm going to try my best, but maybe we just get back to math. Like I didn't know how to get to that. And so us talking about SEL, resilience, empathy, all those things really was a light bulb moment for me to go, wow, teachers need this. I needed this. So let's get into these classrooms and give them this piece.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I think it is relevant to parenting too. So the other piece of my story is that I have three used to be little kids, three very large kids who are now 17, 15, and 13. And they have been with me throughout this whole journey since I've been doing this work at ChildBuilders. They've been my test subjects, and they have they push back when they see that what I'm what I'm doing as a parent is not consistent with what they know my message is to teachers and other parents through ChildBuilders. That's really been my favorite part, is
I'm
they
sure.
hold me accountable to the efforts that we're making.
And very intelligent kids who I'm sure could be like understanding that there is something different that Child Builders is saying than sometimes what we do. I'm very similar with my daughter. It's like she knows we talk about things and she knows the truth. Oh, is this the
Do
Child
you remember?
Builders?
So this used to be on the big rug that
Yep.
was on the wall at ChildBuilders, and I never really paid a lot of attention to it, but it's called How to Really Love a Child. It says, be there, say yes as often as possible. Let them bang on pots and pans. If they're crabby, put them in water. If they're lovable, love yourself. Realize how important it is to be a child. Go to a movie theater in your pajamas. Read books
Mm.
aloud with joy. Invent pleasures together. Remember how really small they are. Giggle a lot. Surprise them. And then it just keeps going. And my middle child would quote this back to me. He obviously paid attention whenever we went to the office, and he memorized like the first couple of lines. And when things were a little bit rough and there was some friction in the house and there was stress that was unmanaged and things were a little bit out of control, he would say, that is not what it says at ChildBuilders. It
Wow.
says, and then he would read it, and he would recite it. And that would be like,
Man, Child Builders. Gosh, I remember seeing that rug a lot and that little frame. We would have that around the office. And it was before I was a parent. And I was like, yes, I'm going to do all these things. This is going to be amazing. I'm totally going to go to a theater in my pajamas. And then you just forget. Like, hearing that again is so good to be reminded, like, gosh, yeah, these are the important things. And we do the same thing with our kids sometimes. We're just managing. We talked about that in the first couple episodes, like managing our own stress, managing their behavior, and we forget like to say yes to things and have fun and be curious with them. And it's like, yeah, all the things that make childhood so great. Um,
absolutely.
and and a part of that is resilience. Like I think more so than any other of our podcasts so far, this subject has really gotten into my head. I just feel like I keep thinking about resilience. I've been thinking about my past, my childhood. Do I have resilience? What does that mean? And it's bringing up a lot of like personal stories and thoughts about um, my childhood again, and my daughter. And so it's not an easy subject to kind of wrap your mind around. There's a lot of facets to resilience. So let's just start at the beginning with it. I mean, we can start with some of our personal stories and also what is resilience? What does it even mean? What are we talking about when we say be resilient in life?
Sure. Yes. I think it's a little bit of a can of worms because it's such a relatively small and easy to say word, but it means so many things. And first of all, as I was looking over our notes on resilience last night in preparation for this, I was reminded that in a way, so we think about resilience as being the ability to kind of get back up when you've been knocked down.
Mm-hmm.
That's like a very simple way to think about it. So as a human being going through life, something difficult, challenging, traumatic, etc., comes along and smacks you around a bit,
Mm-hmm.
and it doesn't damage you, right? It doesn't cause long-term effects that debilitate you over time. That's what it means to be resilient, is you have the capacity to get back up and keep going. um, which means it's kind of resilience is kind of measured by not being damaged by the experiences that you have, which is sort of a weird, how do we teach kids to not be harmed by this? You know,
Exactly.
this stuff is going to happen, and how do you just not be debilitated by it?
Hmm.
That's a hard way to think about it. Or do we have to think about it as resilience is, you know, some kind of process in our, between our hearts and our minds, that gives us actual strength
Mm.
when we feel the friction of life, when we feel the challenge of life, we build a strength to stand back up and keep going. So kind of,
Mm.
is it the absence of something, or is it a a a skill, a belief, a personality trait that you
Yeah.
can kind of cultivate? So I think it's, with that said, very natural to go, okay, that sounds great, but how do I do this for myself as a parent? How do I help my child? Do I have any control over whether my child has this trait, has
And how do
this
you
ability?
even measure it or see it is part of the thing. And so often we want to protect our kids. And so how are we building that trait when it's kind of invisible? And most of the time we're walking around going, what are the things that could harm us? And I'll take them on. I'll protect my child from that. It's a very hard concept to know and see in
And
others.
it only exists, you can only see it when you are experiencing a hardship.
Yeah.
So if we're protected all the time, if we're, you know, our life is padded as growing up, and we never experience the friction, then we're never going to know if we have the resilience. And maybe we're not going to have the resilience just because we haven't experienced the friction.
Right.
But at the same time, how do we feel like good parents and protecting our children while also allowing them to feel the friction and develop the resilience? Yes, that's very complicated.
And one thing I like that you said when we talked about this a few weeks ago, is that it is also, allowing our children to go through things, but it's allowing them to see us go through things and talking through that with them, which I've really carried with me because I think just growing up for me, I had a really great childhood, but I think I saw my parents go through some stuff and go, I can get back up. I can do this again. And that just built it within me. Like, oh, this is what you do. This is, I didn't see them just kind of let life knock them down. Or if they did, they talked about it and we got back up. Um, and so maybe that's a part of this too, is allowing our children to go through hard things, also letting them see it in us, not hiding, and walking them through what's going on, what we're feeling, what we're thinking, that like, yeah, today was really hard, but I'm going to keep going. Um, so yeah, I think
Yeah.
all of that, talking about the definition of resilience, if we think about us going through this and talking to our kids, which would mean, bouncing back from setbacks, managing stress effectively. All of these are things, develop healthy coping mechanisms, and then maintaining positive relationships and achieving goals. All of those are these really big concepts. And also, we can model a lot of that for our kids, and we can talk through a lot of that when we're going through hard times. How would you speak to that in showing our kids how we manage stress effectively?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I want to talk a little bit about why, why all of a sudden are we talking about stress? Like we were
Mm.
talking about resilience 5 seconds ago, and now what is this? A new conversation? We're talking about stress now.
Yeah.
It's the same conversation, because if you're going to experience hard things, it's going to activate your stress response. And
Mm.
if you have a positive, healthy sort of coping ability, right? You have stress management strategies, you have a regulated system. Like your emotions, when they get out of control, you can bring them back into control, right? That allows you to work through the friction or the challenge or the trauma that you're facing.
Yeah.
If you haven't got that, you don't have healthy coping mechanisms, then when you hit that wall of, challenge, friction, trouble, I don't know if I should use just a real example here. What
Right.
are you going to do? You're going to fall apart. You're going to have a temper tantrum. You're going to hurt somebody. You're going to withdraw and numb
Yeah.
yourself. I think that's a very common thing that people do is they resort to kind of angry outburst or withdrawal. And maybe that goes along with substance abuse and few too many glasses of wine at night to kind of soothe everything, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the ability to cope, to have a set of stress management skills that are positive and healthy is absolutely essential to building resilience. So that is definitely like one of the main key points. And where that comes from in kids is their home environment
Yeah.
a lot of the time, and even from the time they're too young to remember. So way back when they're really little, how do babies and toddlers and very small children learn how to manage their big emotions? And they really do it by being guided by their caregiver, by their main person who is taking care of them. So that's usually a mom or a dad, but it could also be if they're in daycare, somebody at daycare kind of helps them on a regular basis, on a predictable basis, learn how to self-regulate, learn how to self-soothe.
Right.
So that means that when a baby is crying, when a baby is distressed, they're taken care of, they're comforted. And that helps them learn the building blocks of stress management later on.
Right. And we can kind of set those building blocks for kids and hopefully, in a smaller level, talking about our personal lives and our kids, they haven't had some of the things that other children have had to deal with. In a lot of ways, we talked about how privilege can oftentimes stop resilience because it's like, well, you've kind of just had this easy life, but allowing our kids sometimes to fall or fail and then saying, okay, now let's talk about stress and let's learn how to manage that stress. um, it's a very important building block to resilience.
Right. And you have that sort of self-regulation that gets built through having an early childhood that is predictable and loving and relatively calm, right? Relatively stable. Um, and then you have like that gives you a foundation that you can't really like it's just there, right?
Right.
That is absolutely a privilege
Mm-hmm.
to go through your early childhood years with this solid foundation, a predictable household, predictable responses from your caregivers, being comforted, allowed to express feelings, and then being, having parents or caregivers model how to calm down in a way that's healthy, that's not explosive, right? That's not just an angry outburst, or that's not withdrawal. I'm not going to talk about it. We don't talk about feelings here.
Yeah.
But I recognize that you're having feelings. This is maybe name the feelings, so I think that's really important to do with little kids like this. Oof, this is a big feeling. This is
Yeah.
a lot of emotion that you're having right now about whatever thing. Let's try taking a deep breath. Okay, so that privilege of having a solid foundation is awesome and allows you to be able to then fall, fail, make
Yeah.
mistakes, and it doesn't end you. It doesn't
Right.
crumble. You don't crumble. You don't become terrified to try again. Um, so
I
so
think
they go hand in hand.
absolutely. I think if you're always in an emergency mindset, where your basic needs aren't met. We talk a lot about protective factors and how all those things um, build, can help build resilience and healthy relationships and all those things. That is kind of the building blocks. But if a child is always in emergency mode, or they don't have that safety net, then how do you get to the next step? You're just always constantly like in triage, like
Mhm.
not a moment's time to sit and manage emotions and like move on to, oh, that was really hard. Like I can, but I got through it. You almost don't have time to process. And I asked you earlier this morning, when we were texting back and forth about some of these questions, do you think there are personalities that lend themselves more toward just being resilient? Like a child who really shouldn't, they didn't have all those protective factors and a great home and all those things, but somehow it feels like, well, they know how to get back from hard times, and they know how to manage their stress, and they know how to achieve goals. Are there personalities that kind of are already predisposed to resilience, do you think?
So I think that because all of this definitely tracks back to brain development, right? And all of that stuff that we're talking about, the privilege of early childhood being stable, that that helps your brain to be able to develop in a certain way, right?
Mm,
And also we should go back to that later too and say that just because you don't have the privilege of a stable household growing up, right? And you haven't developed that natural self-regulation as a result, doesn't mean it can't be learned, right?
absolutely.
And again, I guess I'll tie that back to your brain development. There's a thing called plasticity, which is your brain's ability to form new neurons, new networks,
Yeah, new
and that
pathways.
new pathways in your brain, and that your brain is able to do that for most of your life.
Mm,
Early childhood, it does it a whole lot. When you're a teenager, it does it a whole lot. And there are times in your life when it's pruning the pathways and making you more efficient. But you can develop new pathways for pretty much your whole life.
yeah,
So that's important to realize, is that you can practice and learn these coping skills anyway, later, even if you didn't have that privilege growing up. So
yeah,
I just wanted to make sure to say that.
that's great.
Um, and then because it's about your actual brain development, all of your stress response is managed in the different parts of your brain. I was reading actually last night that people who are highly resilient have a more developed prefrontal cortex. So your prefrontal cortex is
Mm,
the part of you that is in charge of decision making and kind of it's in charge of regulating your emotions and your kind of cognitive choice brain, not your deep emotional center that just kind of reacts to things and feels fear and generates the butterflies in your stomach. Your prefrontal cortex is your, what do they call it, your like master control center,
control center. Yeah, yeah.
right, of your,
That's
of
so
your
interesting.
of your body. Right. So it does suggest, and I don't know if there's any new research on this. Um, it does suggest that there could be a genetic component to resilience. Um, but I think it'd be very hard to tease that out
Mhm.
from just sort of the generational factors.
Yes, agree.
So kind of how our family operates together and the stories that we tell about why our family does what it does, I think are probably just as powerful in developing those pathways in your brain as your sort of innate genetic structure. So I don't know. I would say that would lead to the personality part, is sort of the innate genetic structure. Um, but
Yeah,
yeah.
I was thinking about this morning about my dad, being one of the smartest people I know, but being an Amish little boy who only went to eighth grade, right? He didn't have a whole lot of knowledge about life or about how things work, but he came from an Amish background, which in itself is kind of a literally pick yourself up by your bootstraps. It's 4 a.m. the cows need milking, and he would talk about that, like being 8 years old and it's being dark and cold in Pennsylvania and him having to just get up and go do the cows stuff, which is pretty resilient, pretty much like pick yourself up and get the job done. There were, I think, later in life, some coping strategies that were not healthy in his life, but there was this certain upbringing of that. And it's same with my mom. She still does it to this day. It's like, let's not wallow. Let's get up and let's get the job done. Because in some ways, they didn't have the allowance of not getting the job done.
Yeah, I totally have something to say about that, which is we talked about stress and feelings, and that's kind of soft and sweet, right? But a really important part of resilience is this idea of agency.
Mm,
So that's kind of a fancy word to mean the belief and the knowing that what you do, the choices you make, first of all, have an effect on the world around you. And second of all, if you make different choices, different things happen.
mm,
So you can imagine just going through life and believing that things happen to you, and who knows why they happen to you. They're unpredictable. Sometimes mom is yelling, sometimes mom is, absent. You know, I don't know what's happening, but things happen to me, and I
yeah.
don't really have any control over my environment. And on the flip side, I make choices and I feel the consequences of those choices. And I see the impact that those choices are having on the world around me. So it's like you can make a contribution. That's why in our Build to Nurture program, we have a section on classroom contribution. It's important for kids to see that they bring something to the community. They bring an element, an aspect, a perspective into their community that matters, and they're seen for it and they're recognized for it. That's trying to build that idea of you matter to the world around you, and simultaneously, what happens to you is, in some degree, right? Some degree at least, a product of your choices,
Mhm.
which means that if I fall down, I choose to get back up and walk a different direction. And that
Yeah.
choice is mine and I control it. So that part, that's so important in resilience. And it seems like your dad's upbringing could play really well into that. Like, I'm milking the cows, and it's not because somebody told me to. It's because I know that if I don't milk the cows, like, I get it. There's not going to be
Right.
milk, and my community is going to suffer for it. And I've probably seen that happen. I've probably seen somebody who didn't milk the cows one morning, or we've told a story about that or whatever. And there was a ripple effect through our world,
Yeah.
right? Through our community. So what I do has a very tangible, direct impact on the world around me. And it's also in the context of routine, right?
Mm,
Routine and predictability. And I'm sure he knew exactly what would happen to him if he refused to get up and made a different choice.
right.
I don't think I doubt there was a question about what the consequences were going to be.
Right. Man, I love that so much, just because I just feel like that's really getting to the heart of resilience. It's more than just getting up when we fall down. It's the real heart of it is we matter. Like, there's a reason for me to get up. There's a reason for me to keep going. And it's because I matter to the people around me. And these choices matter. And I want to make the world a better place. Wow, today's episode was so fascinating. And we had such in depth conversations that we are actually going to break this into two different episodes. Today, we talked about stress management and helping kids see that they matter and have agency. It was a wonderful conversation and eye opening for me. And next episode, we're going to talk about letting our kids fail sometimes, how we and our children don't have to be stuck and we can choose different paths, and how our choices matter. So I hope that you join us next time in the car or with a cup of coffee. And until then, stand strong, stay safe, and I hope you have a wonderful week. Bye.